That's as close to a Clint Eastwood intro as I've ever been a part of. I feel like I ought to have my poncho on, right? Yeah, it's not nice to see you laughing at my mule, that sort of thing. Good evening. The Welcome to the Privy Council. We're here to talk about Mexico, and the only other thing we could have done would have been the Wild Bunch soundtrack, but that we may get around to that as part of this series at some point in the future. So I'm pleased to be joined by many members of the Privy Council. One of our members is off. Now, you guys are all familiar with the concept of night putting, right? You know what that is. Night putting. It's an excuse to go out on a golf course with a golf bunny. Okay, so I'm supposed to believe that our man Colonel Mike Bennett is out night cross country skiing, which I have a hard time sort of. I know what the weather is in Whistler, and I have a hard time believing that that's in fact his evening exercise of choice. But we'll stay tuned next week for more
What's her
information.
name?
I don't know. I know. First he said he had to get the truck repaired or cleaned up or whatever, and then he was going to go night cross country skiing. So we shall
He's
see.
anticipating someone coming back to the truck,
Which is the house by extension, right?
Yeah.
we shall see. I hope we have a good story. Hello to everybody in the chat. I think and Watcher, you can keep me honest on this. I think we are on Rumble, we are on YouTube, and we are on Twitter, I believe.
Correct.
Is that correct?
Yep.
So we have an audience of millions to whom we're broadcasting. If you're within the sound of my voice, hello Elon, how you doing? We're going to try to talk a little bit about Mexico, and I'll just start off by saying that from my perspective, I think those of you who follow us on Future Conflict and or follow us on Twitter, I think you probably come to this with some notion of how I feel about what the current state of play is with Mexico. And we'll get into some of that. Our goal tonight is not necessarily to solve all these issues. Our goal tonight is to start this series, which will be an ongoing series here, on issues with Mexico and Latin America and the southern border and the drug cartels, what have you. And I just want to lay down, like we did in the very first episode, where we laid down the concept of asymmetric risk. What I want to do here is just lay down at least a marker for my view, and I suspect many of the guys on the council, but they're free to disagree, as are you in the chat. Is to lay down a predicate that says, I believe that Mexico is a failed narco state. And we will touch on some of the evidence as to why. We'll get into that in more detail. And Ron's shaking his head because
it's not a failed narco state. It's a successful narco state. It's a failed state.
Yes, it's a failed state.
True.
Okay, point taken there. I'm not here to be splitting the semantics. It's a failed state in the narco business. Let's put it that way. Which has parallels with other failed states that got into the narco business, as we'll see. So my goal here is just to prompt some thought processes on all y'all's parts, and also make the point that I think that we talk about normalcy bias a lot on these various venues, and I think that Americans suffer from probably the worst case of normalcy bias when we come to think about Mexico, and we think about Mexico through the lens of the Yucatan Peninsula, okay? Cancun, or Puerto Vallarta, or any of the any of the great sort of Pacific Coast resorts, which is like going to Jamaica. As long as you stay in the resort, you're okay. Or we think about the fact that we watched an NFL football game in a big stadium in Mexico City, and it covers and it basically occludes our hard view on the depth of the issues in Mexico and the difficulties with respect to anybody doing anything concrete about solving them. So if we don't do anything but leave you with the notion that says, holy shit, this is a real problem down there, then we will have accomplished what we wanted to accomplish. And then we'll build on that as we go through as we go through our discussion about the southern border periodically throughout the balance of the year. It won't be next week. Next week is the episode I'm really looking forward to as well, and that is the on the heels on the cusp of Chinese New Year. It's going to be the review of China writ large, the Year of the Rabbit, and we could probably do more shows than one on that, but we're going to try to do that in one show, and you'll hear more about that as we get closer. So, with that in mind, let me do a round robin here with everybody. Joe, start us off. I know you've been broadcasting today, so hopefully you've been able to get your views out and have learned a little something in the meantime. So, since I saw you last, what's going on? You're muted.
No, that's not me. I'm not muted. Never happens. A lot's been going on. I was over on Legal Mindset just a few minutes ago talking about some of the new laws coming out and some of the attempted laws coming out, like magazine bans and assault weapon bans and the bump stock ban and bans of all sorts. So it was a good time. Good conversation, very productive. We hope folks learned some things. And
did you touch on the Supreme Court ruling today about New York and its ban on? Is it open carry or concealed carry on buses?
It's a concealed carry law, but there's a misconception there. The New York Supreme Court is not the highest court in New York. It's a local court. They call them opposite of what we do. The Supreme Court is like your local district court. So
So this was not I didn't read anything. I saw a blurb go by and I saw Supreme Court and I thought, and I was trying to think, well, who's flipped on the U.S. Supreme Court in that context?
Well, actually, I think the U.S. Supreme Court would probably agree with them because it's saying that the arbitrary decisions are unconstitutional. So that's a good thing.
Very good. Captain Ron, how are you, sir?
I'm well. I'm well. I actually got a promotion to major, so it's good.
Oh, excellent. Major Ron. Major Tom.
No, that's no, we're doing good out here in South Dakota. We're
have you guys gotten rid of all the snow that has accumulated?
Absolutely not.
Good. I'm glad.
It hasn't gotten above freezing since the 2-week snowstorm.
Since Halloween or what? I mean,
yeah, no worries.
So I thought maybe Christy would be out with her flamethrower doing your driveway for you.
No. Christy's busy. The legislature started on Tuesday, the annual legislative session for 3 months, and she gave the state of the state and laid out her agenda, and we're it's state government's starting to the wheels are starting to turn again.
Well, good. Are you still dabbling in Republican politics out there?
I am.
No good deed goes unpunished.
Thank you. I'd say things, but I'd probably get banned from all internet chats. So
okay. Well, we don't want you to do that.
No, I don't think there's enough swear words yet to encompass my frustration with local and state Republican politics.
All right, so Peter Provenzano in the chat has jumped ahead on us here just a little bit, and since your son is in the 82nd Airborne, well, I'll ask the question. He wants to know if the 82nd's jumping into Mexico City.
God, I hope not, because then then the Marines are going to have to lose their the Halls of Montezuma phrase in their hymn. The 82nd will have to incorporate it. No. But absolutely not. There's no planning right now for that, and so.
All right, very good. James, Old Hong Kong. What are you? This is not Asian night. What are you doing here? Are you there?
So AMLO came out today and complimented us on our 40 million Mexicans who live in the United States. I think he's forgotten that most of them are Americans. But got an interesting take from the president of Mexico, and spent a little time in the country, liked the country, kept an eye on the country for the last 35, 40 years. And it's unique because it ties in very nicely.
I'm just busting your chops.
I know it does. It's an interesting place.
It's the Philippines with better food. That's all it is. So
yeah. Well, anywhere the Manila galleons go, I'm interested in. That's kind of that's my platform. So, all good.
And Ramzan Kadyrov's lost brother Matt Kadyrov. How are you doing, buddy?
I'm well. I am well.
Good.
I am well.
And I think you may be setting records for appearances on the interwebs.
Well, yeah, I with Radio Contra recorded 2 episodes today. One with Intrepid Tactics. That is, he's a former third group guy, third Special Forces group, and he's out in Washington State doing some great stuff out there. And we had a very wonderful podcast that went on for close to an hour and a half, and that is posted up. Also did a podcast with the owner and president of Goldback Incorporated, which Goldback I talked about on the last episode, which is fractional gold denominations that are pressed out into bills, and I think it's a really fascinating product for using precious metals in day-to-day transactions. And that podcast was just over an hour long as well, and a lot of interesting points that were brought up in that interview. It wasn't just him pushing a product for sure. It was explaining really his philosophy, um, his underlying philosophy for the creation of goldbacks, the protection against counterfeiting, which is a huge thing out of China, with both gold and silver bullion now. The protections that they have against that, and really, it was really a fascinating interview. It was the first one that I've done with anyone in the precious metals market, and him being a pretty serious person putting out a product that is a lot of political connections at the local level in various states. Ron, you'll be pleased to know he announced on the podcast that South Dakota is going to be the next state to have goldbacks made, and they're going to be printed in 2023. And he detailed some plans of their expansion of operations. And so these are going to end up being much more widely circulated now. So I had a great time. I've got a couple more very high profile podcasts that are going to be kicked out tomorrow. From some major industry companies. One of them is Palmetto State Armory. The other is Primary Arms. So we're going to be, they're getting ready to head out to SHOT Show, and we're going to be talking a lot about their products, what's on the horizon.
So tell me a little bit. What time is the PSA piece, and where will it be?
So the PSA piece is we're going to be recording it during the day just before Josiah punches out, and then I'm going to have it uploaded shortly after that. So
got it.
I would say probably by this time tomorrow night it'll be loaded up, and of course we'll have the Sons of Liberty podcast going on as well. That is a live show, and Joe will be on there hopefully with a new microphone, so that I don't have to get dozens of emails from people angry that Joe's audio is super low.
Whatever.
No. It's cool, brother. But I had somebody offer to buy you a microphone and send it to
No,
you.
I have one. I just didn't know how to hook it into my phone. I got it now. Be good.
But now the Palmetto State Armory podcast, the one with them is going to be done with the co-owner of the company and some senior level folks that work there. And, I'm going to be asking them a lot of questions as far as things that people really want to know, stuff that I've seen in class, manufacturing process.
Kevin's paying attention. Right. Kevin Dorr in the chat's paying attention. He knows my affinity for PSA AKs. So.
Oh, love them.
I wouldn't know anything about them.
Love them. And we're going to be talking about that quite a bit because little known fact, the crew at Palmetto State Armory, the senior leadership team, has a very strong love of the Kalashnikov. And that's why they've begun recreating classic AKs like the Type 56 being the hot one on the market right now. But they have a line of demilled Russian kits, demilled Romanian kits that they've put together with their own receivers, and they've done some period correct stuff. But they have the thing is that they have a partnership with a lot of really high quality companies out there that they don't necessarily advertise, and one of them being SLR Gunworks. Or SLR Rifle Works rather, and there is a variant of their GF3 that is suppressor ready, that has SLR everything kitted out on it. And so
here's what I need you to do. Here's what I need you to do with those guys tomorrow. I need you to ask them if they make, or if we can source, a mounting bracket in the sidecar of a Ural motorcycle for a folding stock AK. Okay, sort of just slide it right in, like in a little holster thing there.
I'll ask them, but what I will say
right
is
inside the Ural.
I have a machinist friend here local that might be able to. You get some measurements out for a pintle mount for that. And,
okay.
we might be able to crank.
I think too, you need to lay the groundwork for them to be the official sponsor of firearms for the forces of the Duchy of Montana.
No, we will talk about that. I think there's
an opportunity thing here.
We will talk about that.
Yeah,
I think that's a wise move. Yeah. Watcher, how are you this evening?
Oh, doing fantastic.
The Watcher crew. How's the Watcher crew?
Oh, they're good. Not necessarily quiet, but good.
All right, guys, we're going to dive in and talk about all things Mexico. So let's pull up our slide deck and let's go to the next slide. So I have a thing about this movie. I have a thing about movies anyhow, but I have a particular thing about this movie because I think that this movie in 2000, whatever it was, 17, 18, I think this movie really opened a lot of people's eyes as to what was really going on in Mexico. I think between this and Day of the Soldado, I think it educated a lot of people about what the sort of really reals in Mexico. I know that I've watched it with people who look at me and say, "Come on, that doesn't really happen down. It's not really that bad." Well, it's probably worse than what it was in that instance, and so I like to we'll use this thematically. We're not going to do a movie review, but we'll use this thematically as we go through this discussion of what is, in my mind, and with Ron's edit, a failed state that is a narco business. Okay, we'll call it that. Next slide. On a little more serious note, the relationship between the United States and/or elements of the United States, i.e., Texas, and Mexico, has been a troubled one for a long period of time. And there have been times when it's worked really well, and there have been times that, there's been a great deal of animosity, whether it's the Alamo or the Mexican War in 1846. Or Pancho Villa, or Blackjack Pershing. My favorite episode is the Zimmerman telegram, which you see in the lower left-hand corner of this little collage that we have here. But I think NAFTA is probably the thing that amongst all of us probably can generate the most amount of both positive and negative sentiment as it relates to Mexico. I am not a proponent of NAFTA. I think NAFTA was a huge mistake in terms of deindustrializing aspects of the United States for the benefit of Mexico. And we're about to do that again with the agreements, or at least the notional agreements, that have been crafted at this Three Amigos summit in Mexico City this week, whereby we're subsidizing, we, the American taxpayer, are going to be subsidizing Mexico's transition to solar, which, frankly, the Chinese can do cheaper and more cost effectively. And also we're going to be helping them. Adjust to climate change, because everybody's got to take the climate change pledge to be at the cool kids lunch table at Davos.
Absolutely nonsensical. Actually,
yeah, it is. Well, it's interesting to me that Mexico has gone from being the number 5 producer of crude oil 20 years ago in the world. Their production has dropped 50%. They no longer are in the top 10, and we're going to help them transition from the hydrocarbon to solar, and it won't be hydropower because there's not enough water in Mexico, but solar and wind and whatever else, and so that if they ever get a cold snap, they can be just like Texas from that perspective. So anyhow, we have a love-hate relationship with Mexico, and this again goes back to the normalcy bias that I talked about, and that is, depending upon how you view Mexico, is usually dependent upon what your last interaction with Mexico has been. So, any comments, guys, on the nature of this? I'm going to look for you to just jump in here. I'm not going to call on people per se, but any comments on the nature of our long-standing relationship?
It's nonsensical. I'm shocked and surprised that Justin didn't show up in an actual Three Amigos costume or a sombrero. Although I'm not ruling out that he didn't at some point. The conversation was obviously so enlightening that Joe Biden fell asleep. But I was reading a book called Homeland Siege by H. John Poole, where he posits that the Chandler, Arizona raid that led to the Pancho Villa punitive expedition isn't that far off from happening a second time, where bandits crossed the border. What was that?
Columbus, New Mexico.
Columbus. Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm something came across my screen.
Remember, I was there. I'm that old, so you know.
Yeah, you are that old. You were in the expedition. You weren't in the city. You were in the expedition.
Yeah, me and Georgie Patton.
Here you go. But
did you have the bandoliers? Did you have the bandoliers, Ron?
No. I had the 45
rock,
though.
I think you could rock bandoliers. So
I could. I have.
Listen, I would rock the leather bandoliers when I have my my Mosin out because it really fits the look, you know.
Indeed.
Anyway,
hey, before it scrolls out of way, I want to grab Hunch's super chat here for $5, and Hunch says, "Whoop, it almost disappeared. There it is. That NAFTA was a knife in the back for blue collar tradesmen." I think that's true. I think beyond that, it was also a knife in the back for auto workers and other folks who have seen their livelihoods move to Mexico in the maquiladoras, where they're basically in forward operating bases these days with the barbed wire and inside the wire for the most part. So yeah, I think NAFTA has been a catastrophic mistake that the United States made, in keeping with the deindustrialization of the United States, something which I know Jim and I have watched over the last almost now 40 years in the context of production moving offshore, and now some of it, at least notionally, being talked about moving it onshore. And we'll come back to that in the concept again of what came out of the Three Amigos Summit and the desire to shift jobs that we just passed the CHIPS Act to bring back to the United States. We somehow feel compelled that some of that stuff in the supply chain for semiconductors has got to go to Mexico. And I don't buy that at all. So, all right. Anybody else want to comment?
Yeah, it's just the reason they keep going back to Mexico is we need a low-cost labor pool to offset the intellectual property, the technology assembly, right? Because you got to make stuff. And so if you got these robotic fabs, then you have to assemble product. They've got to find a place to go. And, you know, China's not too friendly. Asia's now pricing itself out, and capacity, it's running out. There's not enough population. So they're looking for places to put it. But if you know how Mexico operates, it's very difficult to operate in the maquilas, because in the north you have transnational criminal enterprises that we're clearly going to talk about. Plus you have government interference, and you have labor and other levels of corruption that just feed on you. Once you launch and do your CapEx, they knock at your door, and it's very hard to balance that. That's actually a major skill if you're going to operate in Mexico. And it's gotten dangerous, so it's hard to get your American employees or European or Asian employees to go down there and work.
Yeah, absolutely. And we furthered that by insisting on applying U.S. labor standards, environmental standards, and to one degree or another operating standards via NAFTA and its successor USMC to Mexico, which sort of obviates the competitive advantage that Mexico would have had to a degree. And then we turn around and we allow Mexican long-haul trucks to traverse our highways, which don't have the same safety inspections and other aspects. So we are of many minds as it relates to Mexico, and in most instances, it tends to be a bad outcome for us.
Well, it worked out well in San Diego this week. I mean, with all the heavy rains, the Tijuana River dumps out and can't go in the water in San Diego all the way up the coast. So, the environmental concern on the Mexican border has clearly been very successful, Stan.
Yeah. All right, next slide. So these are just a couple of bullet points that this is my, if it walks like a duck and talks like a duck, it's a duck. So Mexico, as a measure of productivity, Mexico's population is 4 times that of Canada, and yet its GDP is 2/3 of Canada's GDP. And again, remember, this was once a top 5 producer of crude oil on the planet. And with everything that we've moved to Mexico under the auspices of NAFTA and what have you, versus 2.1 trillion in Canada, and of course the U.S. at 25 trillion. So it's not the land of productive labor, and I guess maybe they send their most productive folks to work in as roofers in the United States. Hunch, that's not a shot at you. And despite the fact that Mexico's the 15th largest GDP in the world, half of all Mexican citizens are living in poverty. Now, part of the reason for that is the fact that Mexico is ranked number 4 in terms of total criminal activity on the planet, behind the Democratic Republic of Congo, Colombia, and Myanmar.
Such fine vacation destinations, by the way.
They do outperform in this category, and man, do they outperform. This next statistic, that drug cartels are earning $50 billion a year. You got to take that number with a grain of salt, because that's a number. The source for this was pre-2021. So this doesn't account for the surge in trafficking and other sidelines of revenue that the cartels have assimilated under the Biden administration. That number could be 75 billion a year. And if it is, what it means is that the cartels in aggregate are producing more net revenue than Pemex, the state-owned oil company. And that's an inflection point from an economic perspective in Mexico, because that means that drug cartels are toe-to-toe with the Mexican government when it comes to firepower and other aspects that we'll talk about, and maybe outgunning the Mexican military in those instances where they stage these little cosplay exercises where they're actually going after each other. And we'll touch on that a little bit later in the show. And it's got all the other sort of, all the other hallmarks of Latin American disparate wealth sort of situations. So the chap in the lower right-hand corner, Carlos Slim, is, I don't know, he's top 5, I guess, top 10, certainly in the list. And there's not much that goes on in Mexico that Carlos isn't involved in, but he's personally responsible for 5% of the country's GDP. So that puts Russian oligarchs to shame in the context of wealth concentration. And again, in keeping with the notion that they've killed the goose that lays the golden egg, Mexico gets more money from migrant remittances than from oil exports. And their war on drugs has cost them conservatively 125,000 folks. So that's just laying the predicate for failed state there. Anybody got a comment? Anybody want to talk about any or all of this?
Well, I can confirm the remittances thing, because a lot of what I do for some of my clients is the compliance work on Wells Fargo and auditing, right? So you're looking at all of the monies that are sent throughout the world. The vast majority that leave the United States outflowing through Western Union are going to Mexico or points south, but the vast majority is Mexico. And the second largest is China. So pretty interesting. So
Kevin, no, it didn't dry up. The question from Kevin Dorr is, did the oil dry up? No, they're not investing in production means. They're not doing the work necessary to continue to invest in terms of production in those fields. And it's also spilled over into not making the investments in the various refineries to achieve sort of optimum refinery outcome. So
Yeah,
it's kind of what Biden wants to do here.
Well, the difficulty in Mexico would be also that the security paradigm, the risk perception of the security paradigm runs up the top of the risk register. And so a foreign counterparty that goes in there and puts an immense amount of money into the expensive infrastructure necessary to do
nobody's done that in 2 decades.
Yeah, well, nobody will do it because they know that the nationalization cycle or the passive nationalization cycle will catch them. Somebody will just squeeze them out, right? And so it's a really hard thing when you get it. I mean, Venezuela went through the same thing, which is, it's difficult oil, it's heavy, it's nasty, and it's hard to extract. And so as you don't have access to capital, you don't have access to new tech, it gets harder and harder and harder. That's why Biden wanted Chevron to go back in. Yeah, it's predictable analysis, right?
It's like Mortimer Duke at the end of Trading Places. Turn the machines back on, right? There's been a Duke on this floor since
since it was established.
Yeah, exactly. $1, Mortimer, $1. Matt, anything to add to the good and the
Well, one of the interesting points that you had was that about Biden going to Mexico was investing in solar. And that was kind of, I was waiting for it, but you guys kind of glossed it over. And so I was just kind of letting that one lie. But we've seen this story before.
Yeah.
Where is the solar manufactured? Solyndra. Does anyone remember Solyndra? I mean, solar is a scam. That's a scam, top to bottom.
Yeah.
And it appears Biden is probably he's best understood as a grifter. And I know that that's probably not earth shattering to anybody in the audience, but that's
gasp.
I know it allows people to, when you look at it that way, you can at least rationalize, because there's a lot of conservatives out there. There's a lot of folks that are looking at the Bidens and they just, I can't believe that. I mean, really, you can't believe it. But he's pretty blatant about it. There's money to be made in Mexico, and the solar market is exactly how they're going to do it. It was, the same game under Obama. That was what they were doing. That's what they're going to continue to do. And the Chinese, ever so conveniently, have a lot of resources invested in Mexico. And they are the shadow hand behind a lot of the solar investments here in the United States, including the deal that they made with Harry Reid, which is, very, very interesting and was swept completely under the rug. And a lot of that played into the motivations behind the Bundy Ranch originally, which
correct,
that was going there, and then the whole Maller Wildlife Refuge. That was the reason that they went there, because a lot of the records are being stored there. So, the fact that was pointed out by Biden as one of their objectives in Mexico, that tells me a lot. That's very telling. And that's exactly what's going on. The thing is that the thing that can be appreciated about all this is that they're very transparent about their objectives. It used to be wink, wink, nod, nod. We're there for a strategic partnership or whatever, nonsense language the Department of State comes up with. But at this point, they're not even hiding it anymore.
Nope. No, they're not. They're not. And it's I guess helpful on one hand, but it's disturbing on the other because I just we continue to put ourselves behind the eight ball willingly across a wide spectrum of issues, both in Mexico and anywhere else where the Penn Biden Institute for Diplomacy and Foreign Relations or whatever the hell it's called.
That
Global
had
engagement.
Global engagement.
global engagement. Now that they have found two, not one batch, but two batches of classified documents, quote unquote, it floating around haphazardly. And I'm not trying to insinuate that I'm an expert on classified documents by any means, but as someone who held a clearance, I do understand a few things about it, been read on to certain things and read off. I think that it's very curious that Anthony Blinken was the director of operations and that the Chinese made a huge, quote unquote, anonymous donation.
54 million is what I read.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's significant. And as I pointed out, I think it was yesterday on Twitter, we know that these people are not going to resign. We know that Anthony Blinken's not going to resign. There's too much hubris. He's not going to resign. Merrick Garland's not going to resign. But a special counsel.
Can we get Mayorkas, though? Do you think we can peel off Mayorkas?
Maybe.
No?
Maybe.
No, not at all.
Doubtful, but maybe.
Hey, the problem here is, Matt, is that this is different. You don't understand. I mean, this is Joe Biden. He's the grandpa. He just probably forgot. And it's okay. But Trump, oh my God, no.
Right.
Now, there's an evil dude.
Right.
They actually made that case, right?
They
of
did.
Course I know that.
Made that
That's
case yesterday.
They did.
You got to do air quotes around that word reporter, dude.
Well, that's true. That's true.
Joe Scarborough and Mika Brzezinski.
The hot couple.
Yeah. With dead interns under the desk and who knows what else.
Never mind.
Mm-hmm.
I have not watched two of them in 5 years. I have not turned on MSNBC.
Well, and your life is better for it.
If you go to X Hamster and you go to the celebrity site, you can they have a couple of actors that sort of pretend they're them.
Okay.
I know I've heard.
Yeah. Oh no.
You don't have to turn them on, Stan. Your look doesn't work for them.
I'm not.
They were defending it though. They were defending it. Somebody sent me a clip of this morning. I think it was this morning's show, and they were defending it. And that should come as no surprise that they would defend this, and but it's the thing is that the takeaway from it, and do I think that any accountability will be had? No. I think that there may be some infighting going on inside the Democrat Party. Maybe. Possibly. There might be a move that's being made inside of there. I think that's something that might be interesting to observe over time. But is there going to be real accountability? No. No.
Well, you guys don't need to worry about this because Mark Warner, senator from Virginia, and on the Intel committee said he's going to get to the bottom of it. Don't you worry.
I bet he
God
will.
help us.
And he'll tell us what's going on.
I feel better already.
Well,
we investigated ourselves and found no wrongdoing.
Yeah, I'd really like to turn that over to. I'd really like to have that turned over to Josh Hawley and let him go where he needs to go with that. But that's
I think we should turn it over to that specialized agency. What is it? Oh, the Salvation Army. Yeah, that's it. They're got great investigators.
Yeah.
Frau Farvisna. She's the director of the militant wing of the Salvation Army.
Yeah, exactly. All right, let's go. Let's come back around and get back on all things Mexico. I think we skipped a slide there, but I'm not sure. Nope.
No.
Okay. All right. Well, anyhow, here's where I start to try to draw some parallels, and people will have problems with this, and that's fine. I don't care. You can try to poke holes in this, but I think at a 30,000-foot level, which is where we're operating today, I think what it does set up is the argument that where have you seen this movie before, right? And so Afghanistan in the 90s and into 2000 was a ragtag collection of warlords and other criminal active, the Haqqani network, and one thing and another. And this falls over into Pakistan. We're not doing that here tonight. And so the parallels between Afghanistan failed state, Mexico failed state, high levels of criminality. It bears sort of keeping in the back of your mind as we talk about what does a realistic solution to Mexico from a U.S. perspective, what does it look like? And what mistakes are we likely to make again in the unlikely event that we get to a point where we decide it's finally time to do something about Mexico?
And by that time, it'll be too late.
But it may be too late already.
Well, because we're gonna find the border between us and Mexico is going to be the northern suburbs of Dallas-Fort Worth.
Yes. So I'll say it again: 20-mile buffer zone devoid of life.
Well, there used to be.
So does that?
There used to be a buffer zone.
One second, Ron. Does that become sort of the equivalent of the tribal areas in Pakistan, or what?
Well, only because we've ceded. The great border region. I mean, everything from the Rio Grande, to San Antonio, Austin, and draw some sort of geographic parallel line following the border trace of the Rio Grande. We've ceded all that territory to the illegals, to the cartels, to lawlessness. Before I settled here in South Dakota, my wife and I, we full-time RV'd, and so we're spending time. We're spending a winter in Texas. We did Big Bend National Park, which is really good. And there you go. You can camp right on the Rio Grande, and they got a beautiful area there, and it's kind of marshy and swampy, And off to the west are these really steep canyon walls where the Rio Grande literally cuts through a mesa plateau area. So I mean, there's a very natural barrier there. But so we're camping there, and in the campsite next to me is a couple of border patrol vehicles. I'm like, you got to be shitting me. I mean, but it's a national park, so okay, I got it. So we go north to a state park, and it's nice and it's well maintained, yada yada yada. And there's a Texas Department of State Police guy, whatever they're called this week, and he's talking, and he says, "Hey, I see you're out of state plates, blah blah." We're chatting. I said, "Hey, I want to go here to this place where Judge Roy Bean. Remember the old Paul Newman movie, whatever." And he says, "Yeah, you don't want to go there because that's lawless country. That's the ungoverned country." I'm like, this is like something out of when I first went through Intel school, learning about things, and they showed us old videos of Vietnam where the initial phases where they didn't have good mapping, the areas where they had no mapping, they said, "Here are tigers." That was how they covered the area there, and I'm like, oh shit. Well, I guess, honey, we're not going down south. We're going to head north, and it's scary, intense. I can't imagine being a landowner, a rancher, anywhere in the greater border region in Texas, New Mexico, Arizona. Sierra Vista, a town in Arizona, right along the border, right next to Fort Huachuca, headquarters of Army Intel Training Command, or whatever they call it this week, full of illegals. Fort Huachuca, there are places out there where you can't travel, even though it's a restricted Army post, because the illegals are transiting through there. And you can't carry weapons on an Army post because God knows we wouldn't want to have violence, in with the military. So, yeah. So, yeah. So I say it's that's. I mean, I'm a little facetious about saying that the front line is going to be Dallas Fort Worth, but it may be even further north than that, because
Yeah.
this, the states are haphazardly declaring, whatever the phrase is, to generate
An
funding
invasion.
for
Right.
invasion, and things like that. But I don't see New Mexico doing it, and Arizona's got a communist governor now who cheated her way into office. So, and she's, they don't care. They literally don't care
So
until
what are we going to do then when that TSMC chip fab plant in Arizona is actually going to be in Mexico? I guess maybe that's the ground rules that they were trying to divide and conquer with today in Mexico City. Before we go, I saw Hunch had a super chat for $5, which really needs to go back to Ron's. Let him answer about why he knows anything about X Hamster. And the only thing I'll intro that with is that the man worked for the CIA. That's all you need to know, right? Is that he worked for the CIA.
Hey, I'm a Renaissance man, Hunch. Give me a
Yeah,
break.
He's got multiple interests.
I hear things.
I hear things. Yeah.
Yeah. Seymour has one in there too.
Yes. Yeah. Seymour. Yes.
Never say penguin in the presence of Stan. First of all.
I hate fucking penguins, and I hate Jerry Nadler, even as sort of the lowest example of penguins. And yes, I'm glad that he's no longer on the Judicial Committee. And that was Jim Jordan, who was running that committee. Just decided he wasn't going to sit through a lunch session with Nadler in front of him.
I shit my pants, Nadler.
Yeah. Well, we're better off. So we are on my scorecard. We are 4 for 4. So Omar is off committees, Schiff is off committees, Swalwell and Nadler are off committees. So far so good. That's a good.
I don't want him to kick AOC off because she's gold on committees. She just exposes how little she knows about literally everything in life by being on committees. So keep it up.
Yeah, but it hasn't mattered yet.
Exactly.
So, I don't know what to say.
I mean, that girl, remember when she first got elected and she showed up in Washington? Oh, I don't have enough money to afford an apartment. Oh, God. And now she's a multimillionaire.
Yep.
And she's only been in office for one term.
I want to be in America. Everything free in America.
Wow. I mean, that girl must give good bartending. That's all I got to say.
Give good bartending. I see what you did there.
All right.
Scallywag. Put some cream in your coffee.
So the existing business of the council having been done, let's move on to our next discussion point. And this goes to my point where I'm stretching to do this, but I'm trying to make people think about the fact that Mexico is not Colorado, with warmer weather. It is a problem. So
you see, that's a big problem we have right there, because a lot of Americans, when their entire exposure is going to Cabo or Cozumel, they actually believe that it's Colorado with warmer weather.
I know, and so Afghanistan's ticket to revenue for a long time has been opium. Opium is a relatively small part of the drug industry in Mexico, but they're both in the failed state family business. So we'll continue to move on.
Yeah, but it's the structure, Stan. I think you've got a good point here, which is when you have transnational enterprises moving narcotics, they don't really care what narcotics they move, and they all have the same problems. They've got to move it. They need transport. They need weapons. They need security, and they need money laundering.
Hey, who owns the 4 major ports on the west side of Mexico?
China.
I think it's a religious denomination.
No, it's a company called Hutchison Whampoa.
Yes.
China.
Hong Kong. Yes.
Hong Kong. Yeah. Li Ka-shing.
Yeah, that's Uncle Lee. Mm-hmm. So
who was little known, but if you see a picture of Li Ka-shing and then you go back and watch Dr. No, you realize that he was cast as Dr. No in the very first James Bond movie. It's
yes.
Amazing.
Yes.
So my undercover agent Ursula Andress is still active?
I don't know about that. I suspect she is. I suspect she's not quite as stunning as she was
Well, now she does movies in air quotes. So I'm just saying.
She's
well,
an
my only problem, Stan, is your comparison between Afghanistan and Mexico is that, and I think you sort of obliquely addressed it, is that Afghanistan had the benefit, if that's the right incorrect word to use, of having um, a a strong state, a security state, Pakistan, next to it that was able to control and monitor and inspire and suckle the insurgency to the point where it was successful. And they were able to organize it with professional trainers and conduits of things like that. Um, you know, I mean, just imagine for a second, and I'm going to pick on all of us here. If Matt, Joe, and I, we all spoke exceptional Spanish. Well, Joe does, but all I know is, yeah, two tacos, bitte. Is that we all show up there and we offer our services to, I don't know, the Sonola cartel, saying, look, we can be your Baron von Steubens. We can
We're the
organize your
three amigos. We're here.
yeah. Oh, yes. But we can organize. Okay, I didn't get that, but yeah. But we can organize your paramilitaries into a professional, disciplined force where they don't just pray and spray. They don't. There's hierarchy. There's discipline, and we're not talking about the discipline of oh, you looked at my woman, bam, you're dead. I mean, but some sort of military where the Mexican military will rapidly be overwhelmed, like the Hessians on Christmas morning in Princeton. So yeah, I mean, just imagine that, and that's the one missing ingredient I think that's keeping the Mexican government, at least they're in there sparring with the cartels. And right now, as you said earlier in this podcast, it's kind of evenly based, but it could be rapidly changing with just the Chinese sending a bunch of trainers.
I guarantee you, someone has done that with CJNG, and that's why they're doing what they're doing. So I think you're on the right track.
And they don't have to be Chinese trainers. I mean, they could be, the Chinese say, hey, Venezuela, let's, send a bunch of, because, hey, we're a bunch of effing gringos. We don't, y'all look alike to me, dudes. I mean, I really can't tell. I'm being sarcastic here, but you get the point.
No, I do. And
the people inside the Beltway wouldn't know shit from Shinola on this stuff. And, next thing you know is the commander of Fort Sam Houston is going, I have to surrender the post because I'm about to be overwhelmed by, Mexican technicals of an unknown, army, but they speak Spanish and they're having Mexican flags and they're saying something about Reconquista. And that sort of thing.
I was going to point that out that the other day I retweeted a photo of 4 men arrested, well inside the U.S. and they're all wearing camouflage. They're all carrying backpacks. What else would you call it, right?
Mark Sibley fans?
You can pick your Sibley's been pretty consistent about this, but I mean, you can pick your bad actor from any one of a number of potential players from the Iranians to Hezbollah, which is an arm of the Iranians, to the Venezuelans, and you could have Russians. We've forgotten about the Cubans. It's not like the Cubans haven't been active extranationally for a long period of time.
Well, so, the Cubans are busy celebrating Ana Montez Day, so it's okay.
Okay. So J Sup wants to know, how secure are the Mexican ports on Chinese imports? Not
at all.
Wait. From whose standpoint?
Yeah.
From our standpoint, irrelevant. From the standpoint of the cartels, just fine.
They're exactly what they want. Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's perfect. It's perfect for transnational crime. And back to what
that's how the opium gets here from Afghanistan. Chinese hulls.
You have to have the inefficiency of a weak government presence and a corrupt government presence at the ports of entry in order to have the transnational criminal enterprises cooperate the way they are. It's symbiotic, right? So you have the foreign powers that cooperate with the transnational entity in the weak country to undermine their competitor. And that's what we're facing in Mexico.
Right.
And there's never been a convenient time for the US government to talk about it because the solution is unpalatable, right? And so they've tried to maintain this status quo. And the tragic part is, 100,000 of us have died in the last year or two from these narcotics, this poison that's being built down there. And, you have to go back to the Chinese and say, okay, they owe us for the opium thing in the mind of the machine, right?
Well, they owe the Brits predominantly.
Well, no, but they owe it's the colonialists, Dan. It's not just the Brits.
I understand all that.
So they're going to make the call, and here you are. And so their argument would be, you got to stop your people from using the drugs, and then there won't be demand. I mean, how many times have we heard that in 30 years?
I think we ought to tell the Chinese, look, we'll take care of this. We'll understand the opium war, payment that we need to give you as soon as we get them paying the reparations for to our African Americans, because we're all guilty. So sorry.
It's a never-ending process, Ron. You're right.
But the corruption doesn't end, though, at the U.S. border. The U.S. Customs Department has a very aggressive counterintelligence agency of its own for a reason.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So, well, no, it's big money, right?
Oh,
if I'm a guy manning that inspection checkpoint, this is good money, right?
Well, you turn sideways for 10 minutes, and and these guys will hand you lots of cash.
Guys, come on, what's my favorite line? Welcome to Zangaro. That's
even here in South Dakota. Interstate 90 is a fentanyl superhighway, transiting between the I-25 coming up from Denver and Albuquerque and places south, and then over to Chicago, on I-90. So hey, it's
all highways. It's all highways all the time.
Yeah, I mean we're constantly
anymore. It's anywhere.
Our state police are constantly picking up, and they're so busy picking up the fentanyl smugglers here that they don't have time to pick up the local meth dealers and producers. It's, damn it.
So that's a point that H. John Poole makes in his book about the drug industry in America's MS-13 and M-18, these street gangs. You only find them along U.S. highways from the south to the north. That's why there's a lot of them in the Northeast, because it's along the highway. They're guarding
the major cities.
So what's interesting is he posits in his book that the Chinese actually do a lot of funding of MS-13 and M-18. Here's a funny thing. A couple of the people arrested inside they're there to destabilize us, right? So a couple of people arrested inside the Brazilian Congress over the weekend had MS-13 and M-18 tattoos.
Yeah, I saw those photos, Joe. Yeah.
It's pretty interesting.
It is. So especially since they're supposed to be, aren't they Spanish and Salvadorian originated?
Salvadoran and Mexican. Yeah.
But let me see. What is the native language of Brazil again? It is not Spanish. It's Portuguese.
Not Spanish. It's Portuguese.
Wow.
So, Jim,
I'm the only person in my family that doesn't speak Portuguese, but whatever. My dad does. My aunts do.
I'm curious. Okay. I'm curious, Jim, is to do we have? I doubt that it's the Chinese government that's funding MS-13 or 18 directly, but it wouldn't surprise me if the
triads.
Aren't.
That's the exact position he takes, is that the triads run that affiliation.
Wait, you think the triads would operate independently or without the
Oh no, it is with.
Oh no, it's
they're Chinese intelligence service.
They're the cutout. They're the cutout.
No, it's the symbiosis. Okay. Everybody knew who and knows who, and they're used in the dark space. And the dark space of transnational crime is growing. And it's one of the really sad things about the global war on terrorism is we've supercharged these entities because we've cracked down on the mom and pop stuff of, currency change and banking and regulation. And we've just spun ourselves out of being a reasonable partner in countries that are historically corrupt. It's a very difficult thing to overcome because it's more than half the world now. And the Chinese have backfilled it very aggressively. and all the bricks are backfilling it by nature of the fact that we're not even going to play. I mean, I used to joke about this 20, 25 years ago in places like Indonesia. I'd say, I can show up and I can carry my baseball bat and they'll look at me, smile, and call cricket rules. And you can't play. If you don't show up, you don't play. You can't complain about not controlling and competing. So we've basically not competed for years, but we've created this incredible value bias by dumping payloads of cash out of the back of C-130s in the name of conflict and security. And so where you used to have a $5,000 charge, it's going to be $500,000, $100,000.
Yeah, but that corruption inflation is transitory. Don't worry about
Yeah, exactly. So a friend of mine told me a story. He was in northern Pakistan. He was in Peshawar, going across into Afghanistan. This is late 70s, right before it got kind of whack. And he was going to buy lapis lazuli from the punchier, and so he walked into a cut in a mountain. You and I would call it a cave. Sat down with a guy. Guy pulled a magazine out and showed him a picture of a ruby ring from a jeweler in London in the magazine, and said, "That's how much I want for the rough ruby I have." And he said, "Hey, look. The difference between here and there, rough ruby, cut ruby, the bias had already begun, right?" And then from 79 on, the compatriots of our friends here were funding and arming and training, and we know how that cycle went. And then in this second cycle, boy, it supercharged the amount of money in there. So you had the narcotics money and you had the offsets for 20 some years. I'm not sure how we unwrap that. Mexico suffered the same thing, but it's being used against us in Mexico directly on our frontier. And it does put us at risk. We've already lost 100,000 people. So it's a difficult scenario.
It's difficult, but the first step we need to take is recognize that this whole problem, illegal immigration, the fentanyl invasion, whatever, however you want to terminology it, is not a law enforcement problem. It's a national security problem, and it requires a military response. It goes to Joe's 20 mile dead zone,
yeah.
And we go to Germany and we put want ads in all the papers saying, looking for former inner East German border guards to man, towers, housing provided, and but I'm joking, but it's a military problem, and it's an economic problem, and it's an information problem, and it's a diplomatic problem. And we have notoriously, since the days of our founding, since the Monroe Doctrine, where we arrogantly proclaim, and I love the Monroe Doctrine, don't get me wrong, but remember who we were and how strong we weren't back then, and well, maybe Stan remembers, I don't, but
Yeah,
that
I
the
talked to
Monroe
TJ.
Doctrine, but we proclaimed that, hey, Europe, you stay out of the Americas, and to give some sort of blanket or very thin blanket of protection to the revolutionary movements of Simon Bolivar and what's the other guy, San Martin or whatever, and all the other indigenous groups. And the only time we've really enforced that is we put the pressure on the French to get rid of Maximilian, and we helped empower their revolution. But we've been notoriously arrogant, stupid, uneducated with regards to anything Latin America, not just Mexico, but Nicaragua, El Salvador, Panama, Colombia. Jesus,
and exploitative.
One of the biggest ones is exploitative, but also, but it's exploitative only because we haven't pointed out, like, hey, we're doing this, but here are the economic benefits back to you. So part of it's informational. We don't say
exactly.
We don't explain to them, hey, this is the payback you get because you guys ain't certainly going to eat all these Dole bananas or these whatever the fruit company is, but we will, and you guys are getting this much money. Are you not getting enough money? Probably, but that's because we're greedy capitalists.
Well, the way the U.S. has managed Latin America is we've forced them into the trap of playing oligarch-owned small ball. They've never played global games. The Brazilians, yeah, they're beginning to break out, but look at the trouble they've had. Argentina tried it in the early 1900s and kind of collapsed under the Italian communist inflow. So, we've held them back in our desire to control.
Right. And we don't respect them as foreign equals.
Well, there's no peering that goes on. I agree. Well, but we can't change policy, and they've gone completely pink or slightly red in the last 24 to 36 months, and so we're back to Chile in the early 70s again. So we'll see how it all goes. I mean, Stan, you got to have an opinion on this. Let's hope Mexico doesn't devolve.
See, I think that's a false premise.
Mexico devolving?
Mexico has devolved. And all we're seeing is the last elements of the facade still in place. Mexico has devolved. And that's the point of this show, from my perspective, is if we did nothing else in this 90 minutes, but get the people who are watching this to think about Mexico from the construct that says it is a failed state, and the only thing that keeps it alive is some bias towards normalcy. And when kids go to Cancun for spring break or whatever, that's it. Everywhere else in that country, it's a failed state. And I don't think I'm being too strong about that. And this is Jim, I'm going to ask you to turn your mic off for a minute because I think that's you. Okay, thanks. This is an interesting, this is available on the web if you want to see it. It's the Global Organized Crime Index for 2021, put out by the Global, I'll get the name wrong, but it's the Global Trade International something or other. But if you just Google that, you can pull it up. And it's 150 some odd pages of pretty interesting look at the state of criminality, international criminality on the globe. And in the middle of this little diagram are the top 10 ranked highest, most criminally active states in the world. And we start off with, as we said earlier, Democratic Republic of Congo. And number 2 is Colombia. We'll come back to that in just a minute. Number 3 is Myanmar, and then Mexico. And then we've got Nigeria, and we have Iran, and now we're in the dotted dash. The dash line circles there are places that everybody on this program knows well and knows of our involvement in them. And this is 2021. This isn't 1951. This is 2021. And so we've got Iran, and we've got Iraq, and we've got Afghanistan, and then rounding out the top 10 are the Central African Republic and Honduras.
Ooh, my favorite.
And so again, I'm just trying to make the parallel between, and I think Jim has made this point, and I think others haven't already in this, but it's useful to have it here, and that is criminality impedes that, shining city on the hill of enlightened representative government. And then my sort of add-on to that is that we've not had the solution to that in all the countries we've gone in and broken over the years. We've not been able to nation build those folks back out of their tendencies towards criminality. And criminality didn't come with us, it was there. Mm-hmm. And in some ways, we've made it worse.
Yeah. I mean, how many times have we intervened in Haiti? How many times have the Marines intervened in Nicaragua prior to, Somoza and stuff? We just don't get it. We make the same mistake over and over again.
Well, once you've gone in, once the Pentagon is done and you have to go out, we have no skills, expertise, or patience for the exit and reconstruction phase. We're just not doing it.
No. I think that's not correct, because we do have an example of where we did rebuild a continent, and that was the Marshall Plan. Okay, and Japan? To some extent, I was going to say to some extent, although I think the Japanese had more of a hand in that than we did. We just gave them the space to be able to be Japanese for that period of time.
That's true.
But in the context of Europe, we really did instill elements of what I'll call America there. And we've then taken that, and we have not learned the lesson that said, and this is an easy layup because everybody knows it, and we all joke about the $15 million for transgender studies in Pakistan. But that is the poster child for how the sort of hubris that we bring to this sort of thing, because we're not focused on what the people there want to focus on. We're focused on bringing our political discipline du jour to try to make them just like us, right? Social and political.
We want to bring our social mores to the world.
Yeah. Well, this is where our legalism really hobbles us.
At one point, Jim, it was legalism. At one point, it was really based on bringing our legalism. That's 15 years in the rearview mirror. We are now exporting social engineering to these countries, and that's where this breaks down. It's not even that it's predicated upon the ivory tower sort of notion of legalism and how do you run a Western liberal democracy. This is how you run a progressive woke autocracy that's different from yours, and we're secular in nature. We're not religiously agnostic. We're not prepared to even put up with their religion. We're secular in nature, and despite the fact that great swaths of the countries that we're trying to re-engineer have problems with many of the aspects of what is the sort of hot ideology these days in our country, we're gonna shove it down their throats. Okay.
So in 45 there was no competitive alternative. Now you've got competitive alternatives. You got people climbing in, offering alternative pathways, and we're just not good at playing where there's competition. Because
that's a hell of a thing to say about a capitalist society, by the way.
Well, but actually, there was a competition. Stalin was offering communism, and there were strong communist parties and movements in France and Italy.
Well, there were people in all throughout Africa, including Egypt, who wanted to sign up.
No, but it's interesting. But we crushed them. So Greece, Trieste, all that stuff, we crushed them. And there was no pushback because everybody was so badly beaten down and we were so dominant. Now we're having to play this game and we're really just not good at it. I mean, we take our football and go home. I've seen it happen a million times.
But we leave nice parting gifts everywhere we go.
Well, we do.
Oh, yeah. Gosh.
But again, with the Pentagon, you can spend in an uncontrolled fashion. The second you stop that, the alternative then becomes how do you engage commercially to compete and hold territory in the capitalist legalist way? And it's just failed us miserably in the last 30 years.
Indeed. And the question that is the sort of second tier question that is behind all of this discussion is if, as and when we decide we have to do something about Mexico, how do we not do this again? Because this one isn't 7,000 miles away, okay? This one is not a C-17 airlift through Qatar for all the bad shit to come over. The bad shit's coming over the border already, okay?
And it's not just those, it's not them, it's I mean, every nationality,
there's 100 and some odd countries that have been represented in the illegal flows, and we have no idea who's in the country. None, absolutely none.
Well,
all right, let's move on. Let's keep going. So criminality is, and so what is Mexico's compelling natural advantage in the construct of expressing that level of criminality? And if we can go back for 1 second, please, Watcher, to that slide. And so look at this red bar graph at the lower left-hand corner. It's a little hard to read, but going left to right is human trafficking, the cannabis trade, and you can laugh all you want because grass is now legal in a lot of places, but it's still much cheaper, I think, to buy it illegally. And so the cannabis trade is still a big deal in Mexico. Arms trafficking, human smuggling. Here I don't know what fauna crimes. I guess that's poaching. Synthetic drug trade, cocaine trade, non-renewable resource crime. Oh my God. and other aspects, the heroin trade, and crimes against plants. So you can see a little bit of the bias creeps through.
Crimes against plants.
Well, flora crimes. I mean, so
well, no, it's environmental crime is what they're trying to measure.
I understand that. I understand that. But I just we're the language of the left continues to astound me. So let's go back to where we were. So from the perspective of the largest market on the planet, i.e., the U.S. economy, now running at a level of 25 trillion a year in GDP. Compare that with Afghanistan. It doesn't have the natural advantages in terms of accessing that market, location, and it's really applicable in the context of two of these things, which is one, human trafficking, and the other is the drug trade. So it's in a way, Mexico is blessed and we're cursed by the proximity between these two states, given the different view on what constitutes a normal country and a normal economic model. And it's just made all the worse with foreign control of the ports and the corruption and all the other things that go along there. And it's a tough fix. Next slide. I apologize for the busyness of this slide, but I want to spend a minute here, because the question that's posed by this is, who's the boss of Mexico? And in my son's 5th grade class, they will tell you that it's AMLO, it's Obrador. And
that guy doesn't control much.
He doesn't control much.
He's in charge of Mexico City District Federal.
Yeah.
Apparently,
if
that's it.
If that. So this is and there's a link here to at the bottom, and let me pause for just a minute. I'm behind. I need to get the website for this up and post the prior materials from broadcasts, because this is a situation where I would recommend that you at some point go back and look at this article in Contralina, which is an investigative periodical in Mexico, and the YouTube video that sort of summarizes this slide. That's also, that link is there. But this was written in 2019 at a point where Obrador, who was relatively new as the president of Mexico, decided that he had to put forth some sort of an effort in terms of showing that he was moving against the cartels. Now, this was just before the explosion of human trafficking over the border, but the cartels were still, they were still the cartels. And so he organized the National Guard, up to 110,000 National Guard troops, into 266 jurisdictions where they were going to go in, where they had determined, and the severity is predicated on the color. So red is the worst, and yellow is next worst, and green is sort of okay. But these are all population areas in Mexico, which represent 80% of the population, and they're all in the hands of the cartels. So this was going to be a 6-year military operation to sort of root the cartels out of control of these areas. And again, keep in mind, this is 2019. And the line that I like here is this sort of refreshing frankness from this rear admiral, the uniquely named Enrique Barney Montalvo.
Barney.
I've got one bullet right here.
Yeah. But he's pretty straightforward about the fact that, the government doesn't have any control over these areas, and that institutional weakness and corruption has basically ceded the state control to the cartels. And we didn't spend enough time on it, but the first slide, if we will, maybe we'll go back and take a look at, which is the mix match of the various cartels and who controls what. That's probably a whole different show, but Watcher, let me go back to that slide for just a minute. Okay, here. So I think everybody at this point has a reasonable sort of familiarity with who's who, at least the top 3 or 4. Sinaloa, which is El Chapo's old organization, CJNC, which is the up-and-coming group that's sort of head-to-head with Sinaloa, and the Zetas, and this is just the top 5 or 6. There's probably 300 criminal organizations across Mexico, one stripe or shape or color or another. But you'll see here that wherever you get the stippled look, that's where there's active control fighting between adjacent sort of folks. And to Matt's point, that black dot in the middle, Mexico City Distrito Federal, is sort of like Vatican City. That's sort of what Obrador sort of controls at this particular point.
It's like Kabul.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it is. And then we've got Jalalabad and Helmand and all the rest of the sort of stuff around it. But that's the parallels are uncomfortable. They're not obvious to the way that most people think about Mexico, but they're there, and they're sort of hard to deny. So if I can go back to where we were in that Jackson Pollock looking slide there. So this is really interesting. So this was supposed to be Obrador's 6-year attempt to wrest control of the majority of the population centers away from the cartels. It's not going the way he wanted it to. And I don't know that he ever had the opportunity to really do this, but I think it was stage managed. And I think if you talk to the commanders of the National Guard units that were stuck into each of these places, they knew going in that they were just going to go through the motions on this stuff. Otherwise, they were going to end up dead. Next slide. So how's it worked? Well, this is really easy to bookend. Okay. This is 2 articles from the New York Post. One October the 17th of 2019, talking about El Chapo's son being arrested in I forgot the name of the city. What is it? I can never pronounce the Mexican. It's they're in Sinaloa state and arrested in October of 2019, and then lo and behold, 5 days ago, he was arrested again in the same place by the Mexican authorities. This time as window dressing for the Biden trip to Mexico City. Now, obviously, he was released at some point between these 2 dates. Anybody care to guess when he was released after the first go around? Anybody want to guess? Huh?
I'm going to guess it was a similar situation.
It was October the 18th. he was released after Sinaloa went up in flames. Okay, this time I guess they cut a deal. He had to stick around. He's in the Mexican federal prison. But as soon as Joe's back in the States, I think
they'll release him. Yeah.
He's probably out. They're not going to extradite him. They're not going to extradite him to the United States, I don't think. And why? Well, let's go to the next slide. So the Mexican government and the military, they're partners. They're just not our partners. And this is a story people forget about. This made a big impression upon me when it happened. So this gentleman, Cienfuegos, is the former defense minister of the Mexican government. And this happened right at the end of the Trump administration. You'll notice the date of this article is November 18th, 2020. Okay. And much like El Chapo's son, first go around, we got somebody in Mexico to arrest this guy and extradite him to, I think, Los Angeles. Okay. And now this was after the election, right? This was in that transition period in November of 2020. And Bill Barr was the attorney general. And all hell broke loose. The Mexican government said, we're going to throw everybody in the war on drugs out of the country. All sorts of bad stuff is going to happen. And Bill Barr said, let him go. Got a federal judge to dismiss the charges. And this guy was back in Mexico in 2 days. And what was he there for? What was he arrested for? Accused of taking bribes in exchange for protecting cartel leaders. This is the Lloyd Austin, okay, or the Jim Mattis, or the pick your, or the whoever your favorite defense secretary is. This guy was taking bribes to protect cartel leaders, and we couldn't hold him under the Trump administration. So that ought to give you some indication as to where we are in this situation. And the Mexicans said, no, we're gonna continue to we'll continue to look into this. We'll bring this guy to justice. And I think everybody had a good laugh and went on, because one of the quotes there is, the track record of Mexico acting with any integrity of this on this sort of case doesn't exist. Now, this is a diplomat. This is somebody in our State Department, and they don't say stuff like this for the most part with that sort of candor. So that's our partner in Mexico. That's who we're trying to craft NAFTA and a real sort of first world economy and labor rights and all the rest of that sort of stuff. This is how absolutely invasive the cartels are. And it gives credence to the notion that 80% of the population of Mexico is under the control of one criminal organization or another. Now, does anybody think I'm overplaying this, or you want to take a shot at it, or what's your take? And you will remember that Vicente Fox, the former president of Mexico, concurrent with all this, was just railing against the United States. This is the guy that was W's big friend during their coinciding terms, right? So if you're paying attention, they'll tell you who they are.
Yep.
But you got to listen.
So, Cienfuegos, 100 fires, right?
Yep.
What it means. I speak a little bit of Spanish and dabble in it here and there. But Cienfuegos, all this really tells us is that his services are up for the highest bidder. And, we know that Biden has got his solar investment there, and the Chinese have it as well. It's painting a bigger picture. That's pretty much the long and short of it.
Yeah, I don't even think I begin to sort of create a hierarchy here, okay, of things that I worry about as it relates to Mexico, and I am ashamed at what we're doing in Mexico from a public finance policy as it relates to, and they're perfectly happy to take our money, just like the South Africans were perfectly happy to take our money and say, oh no, we won't burn our coal. No, we won't do that. Okay. and so these guys are just happy to say, well, we'll take your money and we'll build solar fields in Mexico. And it's pretty easy to do. And those are things that are sort of run of the mill international stupidity that we get involved in. But as we're going to talk about now going into this, what I get really concerned about are the existential questions associated with the deeper fundamental problems that we have with Mexico, in that the government is there is no lever that we can pull. There's no body politic that we can engage with to turn around this trend of a super criminal state that exists on our southern border, and every day now under the Biden administration is killing us. And there's no easy way to say that. They're killing us.
Mm-hmm.
They're killing us both in terms of the fentanyl and the tragedy of the drug trade. They're killing us in the context of importing criminals into our major cities, who then kill us here if the fentanyl doesn't get you. And they're killing us likely in the context of it. Again, this I'll channel Sibley for a minute, because it's not the blinding insight of Mark Sibley. It's, if you think about it, it's got to be true. If I'm somebody at the Quds Force and I say, okay, I can run agents across the southern border. I don't know what I want to do with them at some point, but I'll find something to do with them, or I'm the Russians or the Chinese or the whomever. They're going to be killing us at some point in the future in that way. And we don't ever put up a coherent response to that threat. So round numbers, 21 to 23 to now, guys, keep me honest on this. 11 million that we know, 11 million immigrants across the border, haven't gotten asylum. And I've lost count of the gotaways. The last number I saw was 700,000 gotaways.
Those are only gotaways they know about.
Yeah.
Right.
So let's round it. Let's lean into this a little bit. And let's say there's 1 million gotaways. Okay. No, Ron?
No, I think you're 11 million. You double that, and then you're probably closer to the number of the problem.
Yeah. Well, the 1 million gotaways is equal to the population of the state of Montana.
Right, but that's like Joe pointed out. That's just the ones they saw and they couldn't catch. But
Correct.
Yeah, it's like, hey, look over here. Here's my 5 people that you're going to catch. Here's a couple gotaways that you won't be able to catch. But over here are the 100 people that I'm pushing through. So that's why we always underestimate. We always undercount. So I that's why I say you got 11 million. I double that to at least 20 million, and now you have a workable number. And yeah, I mean, it's, if we don't do draconian measures to ensure the sovereignty of the United States, to actually establish a southern border, and then what's deport people that need to that don't belong here. And I really don't give a rat's ass if you were brought over here as a 2-year-old and you've lived here all your life and blah blah. I'm sorry, you don't belong here. You're not here legally. I'm not going to sit there and go and turn my legal system into a effing pretzel to get you a way to stay here. No, all you DACA people, please identify yourself and come here to the Central Coliseum, because we're going to give you citizenship. Oh, I lied. Get on the effing bus and get on the effing airplane, and I'm going to take you to, wherever you belong. And you countries that don't want to accept your former citizens or your citizens who illegally immigrated into the United States, well, guess what? Ooh, that foreign aid that you rely on for your dachas and your resort hotels and whatever, yeah, that's all gone. So, there's, and the thing is we refuse to play hardball, Stan, and we refuse to, our leaders refuse to accept the truth and refuse to tell us the truth.
Oh, I think they know the truth. They
won't accept it. They've tried to manipulate. They tried to bend the truth to, how does this benefit me? Let's do the McCarthy thing. How does this benefit me?
Right now, what we're doing, we're setting up the position of what's wrong. We're going to talk about why in a subsequent episode. And one of the key questions that has to be answered is, are political leaders who do know, and Biden is sort of top of mind, but W was there's a whole list of people I can indict for their failure to act on this.
Right.
The question is why. They had to know. It doesn't, if you can fog a mirror, you can figure this out, right? And so why? What is it that they're trying to achieve that A, they can't tell us about or won't tell us about? And B, how does that relate to what is the sort of normie view of the United States, or not, as the case may be? And we'll talk about that in a subsequent show. But this is all sort of creating sort of intellectual foundation that says we have an enemy across our border. We have an enemy. We have an enemy that is happy to Happy to take our money.
We have
for
enemies who
vacation.
are taking advantage of a lack of a southern border.
Yeah. And we're willingly contributing to that.
Yeah.
We as one party of the two-party system, and then the rest of us as it relates to, we're putting up with it.
Well, yeah, I didn't vote for Eye Patch McCain, so you can't blame me.
Yeah, Eye Patch McCain's not the problem. He's part of the problem.
No,
but
I
he's-
know.
But he's
I'm
symptomatic of the
But
problem.
he's a Texas guy, so therefore he's part of the problem.
Yeah. All right, so let's move on to the next slide because we're into the home stretch here. We're a little bit over, but we'll be done here in just a minute. So here's the sort of statistical case made, and in drawing this comparison together. So 9/11,
Mm-hmm.
everybody knows where they were on 9/11. 9/11 is seared into the American consciousness, at least for a while. And so total deaths from day of and ongoing, about 6,300. So 2,996 day of, and the rest from complications thereafter.
And
So-
even if you include the war deaths from Iraq and Afghanistan and other GWAT encounters,
Correct.
it's still what, like maybe 15K?
Yeah, correct. I didn't do that because I didn't want to mix.
I know, but I'm just saying it even if you include that, it's still a lot less than the slide on the left.
Correct. And so over that same period of time, and realistically, it's the last 7 or so years that it's been statistically, it's been exponential. Fentanyl deaths in the United States, and this doesn't include 2022, and we have those numbers. It's about 90,000 for 2022 added onto this. So in excess of 350,000 fentanyl deaths. That isn't an accident, guys. That isn't some kid sticking their finger in an electric socket. That's not an accident. That is a massive collaboration between state and non-state actors to kill 350,000 Americans. And my question to the panel and to people on listening to this is, it's not even in doubt. Where's the fucking outrage? Because I feel it, right? So
Yeah.
we all know how exercised we were because we saw pictures within a 5, 6 hour, 7 hour period that we watched gobsmacked when the towers went down, right? But
Yeah.
where's the outrage? And it's not like you can't find this information. There's not a day that goes by that you can't pick up something and say, how many fentanyl deaths were there today? And I think early in this process, people sort of wrote it off and said, it's homeless dudes, it's drug addicts, it's whatever, and it's horrible, but but it's not that anymore. It's migrated into the pharmaceutical supply chain such that things that you think are not fentanyl, you didn't go out to buy fentanyl, you went out to get your prescription filled, and it's got fentanyl in it at this particular point. Where's the outrage by the American people? I mean, we've mastered the art of, I don't give a fuck as long as I can come home and do my whatever it is that is my thing that I do. Watch NFL football or whatever my opiate is, so that I don't have to think about the rest of the world. And I got to go to Home Depot because my wife wants to redo the kitchen, right? That sort of bullshit. Where's the outrage in the context of the fact that there's 350,000 Americans dead? Not through accidents, not through anything else, but from a conscious effort to kill Americans.
But God forbid somebody move the speaker's podium, right?
Yeah.
But it hasn't impacted one of the elite class yet. As soon as it impacts somebody of a child of somebody, the son or daughter of a Congress or senator, or a sitting governor, or a major corporate guy who is like taken aback, like this can't happen, and then things will get galvanized, because right now it's so unfocused. And I mean, 9/11, I mean, everybody was focused on the Pentagon and the towers.
Well, yeah, Ron.
But here, I mean, here you got you got the entire United States. I mean, shit, I don't see cameras everywhere, and so a couple people die here, a few people die there. Well, that's traffic accidents. That's this, that's that. You know, there's no
So
concentration
what
of,
you're
of
saying is
public awareness.
there's no ability to discern the difference between traffic accidents
Well, I'm
and
just
and
I'm just
and
saying there's no William Randolph Hearst to do yellow journalism and say, hey, remember the Maine,
yeah.
and let's
Yeah.
and start agitating for this is a problem, because there's nobody talking about it other than us and a few other podcasters. I mean, I don't see Governor Abbott, you know, jumping up and down in his wheelchair, or Katie Hobbs, gloating about stealing an election in Arizona, jumping up and down about this, or even my governor or anybody
So
jumping up and down about
you have to
this,
ask the question, why do they think they can ignore this?
because it hasn't been made a problem to them yet. They don't
Okay.
think it's a problem.
So
They think it's the cost of doing business, and that's the cost of doing business is we got to bring all these people in to do the jobs that supposedly no Americans want to do. I mean, here in the northern Black Hills, Deadwood, it's a tourist destination, and we're desperate for workers. So the South Dakota congressional delegation got an increase in the whatever the H-1 whatever visas are for guest workers to come in for temporary summer help type of thing. And they're all like, oh, next year we're going to have all this, and so we'll be back to a fully functioning casinos and restaurants, and Sturgis will be more successful, and yada yada yada. But
yeah, because what I want is Mexican immigrants who we don't know who they are, deeply involved in food service industries, right? That's what I want.
well,
That
it's not just Mexicans. It's like you go there and they on their name tags hola, my name is Kathy, but they have the country of their origin. I mean, it's remarkable. I'm meeting East Europeans from the Balkans, um, Africans, South Asians. I mean, damn, it's in addition to Latin Americans, it's remarkable. So
So my little theory, Stan, on this is I think they're kind of slow boiling frogs here
yeah,
with fentanyl, with all sorts of things to justify the surveillance continuity from the GWAT, right? So they know they're under pressure from to spin down the Patriot Act, and people are vetching like mad in DC, and you got the R's coming out and saying we're going to investigate, get another church committee, which will gut operations for another decade. That's just guaranteed when you have something like that.
Alhamdulillah.
But here in the US, the operations that shouldn't have been occurring, all of this domestic security stuff will be justified on the back of this uncontrolled foreign influence on narcotics and destabilization of our small towns and cities. My small town here, we had a shooting the other day, and we've had a lot of gang shootings, which are demographically predictable. You can, you pick the paper up, and it's like there were 2 shooting events this weekend in a town of, 30,000 people, and you go, okay, I know what those look like. And this one was unique because it was some adult male Hispanics gun battle, middle of the day in the street, a couple guys down. And then you go look at the names and, it's so-and-so from Texas. Okay, well, is he really from Texas? And you go look, and you've got guys with priors, narcotics, and you're going, okay. So this pattern has formed all across the U.S. At some point, they'll use that to justify a strong arm situation. Problem is, our national crime fighters, Department of Justice, isn't focused on crime anymore. They want to do everything but crime. They want to go do the sexy counterintelligence foreign threat stuff that really shouldn't be in their portfolio. So we're back to the 1940 battle where Hoover wanted to take over the OSS, right? Right now there's going to be a scrap because they're going to come after all of them and say, hey, let's sort this out and get rid of duplication. It's the ultimate bureaucratic nightmare. They're going to cut their budgets. So I think they're going to use this instability in the narcotics problem probably to justify domestic operations. My guess. That's what Cienfuegos would do.
Well, I think I'd like to have Kamala Harris go back to her source problems, and rather than institute, the deeper surveillance state here, let's interdict offshore and let's solve it that way. But there's not a lot of that doesn't fulfill their political agenda at all. All right, let's go to the next slide. And so this is what I would like you guys to think about. And by you guys, I mean both the panel and everybody in the chat. If you're gonna continue to participate in this conversation about what to do, what do we do? What do we do? And I'm going to set out sort of two polar opposites at either end of the spectrum, and hopefully the answer is somewhere in between. So Obrador came into office and almost immediately instituted the hugs not bullets policy in terms of fighting the cartels. And I'm not making this up, honestly.
Way too much money to be made to not fight them.
And so, I mean, and I think that's borne out. El Chapo's son is a good example. And yeah, they rolled him up for a couple of days while Biden was in town, but he'll be out soon if he's not already. So hugs, not bullets, because the cartels are just misunderstood. They are the victims of Columbus's aggression against the indigenous people in Latin America in 1492. They're just trying to get what's theirs, right? You could probably find that in the New York Times if you really did a deep search. So there's the sort of traditional, almost Soros-like hugs not bullets sort of approach. On the other end of that, there's let's roll the GWAT into Mexico and with all that entails, dragging along the nation building cars along with us. We don't have we've not demonstrated the capacity to do that in any meaningful way. But I guess in the meantime, Susie and her friends are going to take their spring break, their junior year. They're going to go to someplace in Mexico. A couple of them are going to end up dead for a variety of different reasons.
Yeah,
we're going to continue to have NFL games and baseball games in Mexico to sort of normalize, within the Mexican District Federal, so that it sitting on my couch somewhere in Middle America looks pretty normal to me, right? Hell, they got NFL down there, sort of thing. So I don't know what the choice needs to be, but this is something we're gonna explore much more in depth as we move through this series. And I genuinely would love folks in the chat, to the extent that you feel strongly about this, or you have thoughts about it, or you'd like us to have a say, or have something you'd like to direct us to in the way of our investigation of this stuff. Please DM any of us, or DM at MT Privy Council, or however you want to do it. You don't have to spend $5 to do it. Just tell us what you'd like to see in the construct of how we continue to peel this onion back over the next several months, because we're going to do that. This is, to my mind, not Taiwan, not Ukraine. And if you've seen, and I didn't want to rerun it because I'm tired of it, but if you've seen the rant that I went on back when in October, this is the highest and clearest present danger to the United States globally. It's not Chinese nuclear weapons. It's not Russian nuclear weapons, because we have the ability to deal with that, and they know it to a degree, to sufficient deterrence. I don't know what the answer to this is. I just know that we need to find an answer to this. Otherwise, we're done. You can stick a fork in us in the foreseeable future.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I know which one we should take, but I know which one they're going to take.
Well, I think that's dependent upon what happens in 2024.
Yeah.
I think between now and then the decision's been made. It's hugs and backhanders.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting. This abrazos no balazos is, the old line was, plata o plomo, silver or lead.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And you can say abrazos no balazos, but at the end of the day, it's still plata y plomo. That's all that matters, right? Is the power.
That's the only language that is understood.
Yeah.
But it's universally understood in the competitive landscape of the people with the guns, right? They know that, and that's not going to change. You look at Guerrero, where they've turned over a family, and there's a new group. Guerrero's always been a bandit-run province or state in Mexico. Everybody's known that for 60 years. Driving to Acapulco from DF was always risky. You didn't want to go at night. You'd go in groups of cars. You wouldn't stop. Because it was bandit country, and it clearly still is, right? They got what is it, El Rojo now? That's not going to go away. There's got to be a way to break the back of that, or just do what we've done for the last 30 years and just accept it. What's not tolerable is the crossing of the border, and that's become a clear national security issue that Biden and Harris had just tripped over. They really don't want to engage it.
Let me answer PD's question in the chat, and Watcher, if you can pull that up so that other people can see it more easily, that would be helpful. Do you think business will lead the way? Thousands of American companies are manufacturing in Mexico. Does that keep increasing? I don't think business is going to lead the way. For all of the genuflecting and virtue signaling associated with the woke agenda in the United States, I think you've noticed that stops at the water's edge. Okay. And if you think that their mission statements and their shared value statements that are posted in the cafeteria by the HR department are going to have any impact on this, you're crazy. And I'll just offer one thing that sort of puts this. You got an iPhone in your pocket, you're an enabler. You're an enabler of slavery in China. And Apple knows that, and they don't give a shit. Yeah, they're making some noise about shifting the supply chain to Vietnam and India, but that's not because they're freaked out by the slave labor in Xinjiang. That's because they know that the Chinese could fuck with them on their supply chain. That's all. And so it's all about the lowest common denominator. And Jim touched on this earlier. It's about cheap labor. And if that means that some of the savings has to get expressed in razor wire at the perimeter, they'll do it. That's a cynical view, but it's a cynical view from somebody who's been in 106 countries.
Well, it's like Nike and all the others. I mean, they're fine with it until someone complains about it, right? Then they'll make some motions and they'll shift around the names on the buildings, but the practice continues.
So, all right, last slide. So we are going to continue this. This is our little bit of our over the horizon look. Just to say that I'd like, again, you all to think about this and let's make the conversation broader. This is Day of the Soldado. It may come to this. I don't know. We'll see.
This is the plomo.
Yeah, this is the plomo.
Yeah, that's the plomo for sure.
I just want Josh Brolin involved if we go that way, because I thought he was pretty effective in both those movies.
He was.
But that's kind of where we are. So let's wrap this up. Give me my last slide, and we'll look at next week. This is going to be a star turn for our friend Old Hong Kong. I'm going to lean on him hard. He doesn't know. Now he knows it. I'm going to lean on him hard next week as we do the Year of the Rabbit review, because there's a couple things going on in China, internally and externally. And I think that we're going to be joined by Max Morton also. I think kicking and screaming, because I don't think he wants to stand up and defend what Mike Shelby said. The sort of 30 days. It's Taiwan's on in 30 days, and but we're not going to hold him to that because I think Joe had a hand in that as well. But we are going to talk.
That's on the Georgian calendar, not on the Julian calendar.
Okay. So we've got a little bit of flexibility there.
So a little leeway.
But we're gonna get into all things China, both economic recovery in China. What are the problems internally in China? How come they waited 3 years to sort of embrace the inevitable from the COVID zero policy? Why? I think I know this. I personally know this. I know, and I'm in agreement with them in terms of they're not adopting the mRNA vaccines. That makes perfect sense given what we're seeing around the world at this particular point. And we will do Taiwan and we'll do other aspects of this, and then we'll be back to some other topics. But I think once a quarter, maybe more, depending upon how it unfolds, we'll come back to this discussion about Mexico because I'm not going to let it go away. Because again, I think it's an existential threat to the country. So, Thank you very much. We're in at just about 2 hours, which is a little over topic, but I don't care. In this instance, I don't think we could talk for 5 hours, and it would be good.
But, we wouldn't even scratch the surface.
Yeah,
it could, but it was 2 hours well spent.
So let me go around. Any parting words of wisdom from you, Joe, and then Ron, and then Jim, and then Watcher. So any you want to close this out?
Yeah, Ron mentioned it, and I'm going to say it loud. The Reconquista is a thing. The desire to reclaim most of the continental U.S. is a thing. And the cartels support it, not the Mexican government. And that's who matters. So, you have to ask yourself, too, what sort of a hand do the Chinese, using the triads as cutouts, have a hand in all of this? And the answer is quite a bit more than you might think. So there's a bigger scheme at play. So I would be watching for that.
Yeah, I mean there's a consistent and strong effort to destabilize the internal workings of the United States. I mean, visa, the illegal immigration, especially with various Latin American nationality groups coming through, the Reconquista, the use of the Chinese triads sponsoring Latin American criminal gangs, MS-13 we mentioned, and a couple others. Chinese intelligence influence and direction, the use of indigenous groups here in the United States that want to see the United States as it is overthrown. Radical Indian movements, returning the land to the First Nations people, Antifa and things like that. So there's a lot of things out there that we once we start attacking the problem, a lot of these ankle biter problems, and pardon, I'm not trying to make light of them, but they will either go away or they will be rapidly downsized to where they're not an issue anymore.
James.
The difficult part of Mexico is anybody from the outside who comes in and tries to do anything is just always from the outside. So you'll end up, there's a deep nationalism in Mexico. There's their regionality and clannish behavior, and the various states defend themselves against bordering states and bordering interests. But it comes down to plato plomo, and it comes down to a fundamental distrust of central authority, because central authority has always been run by the same families. So us breaking that, don't see it happening. Us putting the kibosh on transnational crime, it'd be really hard for us to do directly, I think. It would have to be done in a fairly surreptitious way. I'm sure we're capable of it, but it wouldn't be pretty, and we couldn't do it for as long as necessary. I think our motivations would peter out, and I think it would agitate nationalism in Mexico to a point that it would drive the problem of the Reconquista through the cartels that were at risk. They would push here as quickly as they could to to undermine our national commitment to something like that. So I think it's just, this is a chronic problem and it's going to continue to be.
I think the risk to us, and Walter, I'm going to come to you in just a minute, but I just want to respond to what Jim said. I think the risk to us is the continued willingness to be hollowed out from within before we try to act. The cartels, they're scary. They're certainly bloody. They're violent. They're horrific in terms of their violence, but so is ISIS. So is Al Qaeda. So is a lot of these actors at Boko Haram. I can keep going down the list. And yeah, they're on a relative basis, they're well armed, and they're getting better in terms of both their tactics and their armaments and so forth. But I don't believe that a concerted effort by the United States to knock those guys back into the fucking Stone Age is going to have a greater risk of failure than continuing doing what we're doing, because we're wasting out from the inside. The country, our morals, our standards, our viewpoints, our willingness to care about what's happening to the country. It's inexplicable that people aren't pissed off about this. And I think we can either go to sleep and not wake up, or one day we can act in a manner that is commensurate with the level of threat that I think we face.
So interesting perspective, Sting. I think you're right in a lot of ways, but I'll tell you, when I saw the video footage of the helicopter, and I think it was a 50 cal. Correct me, was it a minigun or a 50 cal that was firing out of that helicopter over Kulia Khan? They had the helicopter circling at night, and there was gunfire coming out of it. Tracer stream. My first thought was, I wonder whose helicopter it is. Right. So for me, it wasn't, well, that's the government. It was looking at it going, geez, I wonder if those guys, I wonder if the Sinaloa guys got their own helicopter now. So it's going to be an interesting outcome.
I'm pretty sure they do.
Well, but the point is, Jim, is that it's not going to get better.
Oh no, yeah, you're right.
In other words, the march to parity the gap to parity is going to continue to close the longer we wait. So,
yep.
Watcher, anything for the good and the welfare here?
Well, we got a $5 super chat real quick. Mr. Anti-Commie says Mexico will always have the distinction to be the only country to lose to the French. I think if you check your history book a little further back,
you might want to dig a little deeper.
A lot of countries.
You may want to take a tour of Africa. By the way, I haven't seen you around lately, so nice to see you back in chat.
Agreed. Not really. I just want to say before we go, I want to thank the let's see, it was almost 150 people that were live on Rumble with us, and almost 100 people that ended up live over on YouTube throughout the show. Appreciate each and every one of you.
Muy bueno.
No, that's it for me, Stan.
Everybody have a good evening. Enjoy the rest of your week. Make it productive. I don't know if you're going to win the $1.3 billion lottery. If you do, I expect a really big super chat.
I'm winning the billions, so I'm just saying.
Well, I think I don't know. I thought the billion didn't get claimed, or I could be wrong.
Well, it's 1.25. 1.25 this Friday.
Okay, so that rolled over. So the 1.1 is rolled over now to 1.3 or something like that.
Yeah,
but the only reason I'm aware of that is I saw a little news piece that somebody had gotten folks really stirred up because they had posted the new total for the Mega Millions and they had the decimal point in the wrong spot, and it was 13.5 billion, not 135, not 1.35. So
that's the state's cut.
That'll get your attention in that instance. Yeah. So thanks everybody. Have a great evening, and we'll look forward to seeing you next week. Whoop 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 whoop.
Whoa, yeah, buzzer beater there.
Thank you very much.
He's obviously from the greater Pennsylvania area. Yin's good. He's from somewhere around Pittsburgh.
Well, that's a good place to be. It's all not right. Ohio. That's thank you again, guys. And
I covet the hat.
We'll see you next week.